He had a good buddy from Helena that was in the service with him, and he was coming. Bill was back in Missoula working as a bellhop at the Florence Hotel, and Larry McClatchy, came over from Helena to spend the weekend, and Larry was dating a girl in the Kappa house, where I was also living. So Larry said, "Can you find a date for my buddy?" So Peg asked me if I was interested, and I said, "Why, sure." And I can even tell you what I wore. Dissy, who was such a marvelous seamstress, had made me a darling suit out of a suit of her father's. Bill had a little Model T car, which just had, well, let's see, there were really a place for 3 people in the front seat. There was a rumble seat, but that wasn't operable at that point in time, as I recall. So we got into the car, and Peg sat on top of Larry's lap, and she was real tall, so she was kind of up above the windshield, and I was in the middle, and he had rigged it up with this little tiny short gear shift. So every time he had to shift gears, he'd have to lean down to this little tiny, and I thought, he's just trying to touch my legs. But anyway, I noticed his shoulders when he kept reaching down. Shoulders were about that broad. So anyway, we went dancing that night and had a really good time. And then the next week, he was back, of course, working at the Florence Hotel. And I was going to work as a model in they were having kind of a trunk showing for various companies. And this one place I was going to model, I don't remember what it was, coats or something for this salesman. So he knew I was going to be at the hotel that day, but he was worried that he wouldn't remember what I looked like after the partying that Saturday night. So anyway, but he did. He remembered me, so just went on from there.
Mother and Dad thought it'd be a good idea to go back to school, and I wasn't opposed to it. I should get back into school as quick as I could, because I'd been away for 3 years, and so I went to the University for spring quarter in '46.
Was that hard?
It was very difficult. I thought I would. I thought I knew. I thought I knew a lot more than I did. It was pretty tough. In fact, it's the toughest quarter I ever spent in school. Poorest grades I ever got in my life. I'd forgotten how to study if I ever knew how, which was questionable. And it was just tough. I got a car during that quarter, but honestly, I didn't let the car affect me, except because I got a garage for it immediately, and I put it in the garage Sunday night, and I didn't take it out until Friday night. But I suppose if I didn't have it, I could have done a little more studying over the weekends. This is a '41 Buick convertible, light green with red leather interior. And I'd have to admit, I'd have to call it my $1 million asset. If you like a little humor. Not too many knew my name, but a lot of people knew the car. And to describe the car, give you more of a feeling for it, why? It only had 25,000 miles on it, which wasn't very many miles, and beautiful car. It had been extremely well cared for. I kept that car until I went to work for a Buick dealership in Great Falls after I got out of school, and I'd ordered a new Buick convertible, same color, light green with red interior, red leather interior. Only this was a super, and then I sold to a jeweler in Great Falls. I said, "Well, now what are we here for? What is this? You got something up your sleeve?" No, he says, "I got it in my pocket." And he took out a check and threw it on the counter. And he says, I said, "What's this for?" He says, "This is for your '41 Buick convertible." It was for $950. So I sold it to him. Wish I'd kept it. Wish I could find it. That's the story of the convertible.
You told
And
me.
and that's how I met Marilyn.
Mother and Dad, I think, looked at what I had done more as a youngster, and then began asking questions of their friends who were in the professions. And I think what they noticed was the fact that I like to work with my hands on small objects, and I like to make them work. I used to make these antique model cars in kits, but I wasn't happy with just sticking them together. I would make the steering wheel move the wheels, and I'd make the windshield flop up and down, and, you know, I'd make things move and work on them. Before we talked about it, before he talked about it with me, or they talked about it with me, he had visited with his friends who were dentists, and thought that, you know, if I didn't have any other real pressing thing that I was really interested in, which I didn't at the time, he thought that would be so, dentistry might be something to consider. I really didn't consider anything else. I don't think they were too wrong. I mean, a person could do lots of things with the same talents, but I was never unhappy with their steering me in that direction.
Initially, I was going to do something completely different. I was going to go to school in New York, to a fashion school, to be a buyer. But the war ended, boys came back. I met Bill Walters-Gershon, and I changed my mind. And really, Dissy and Rock were glad that I was going to be close, really. They said they didn't mind a bit getting the letter when I asked if I could, after they'd gone through jumped through these hoops to get me into that school in New York and everything. But I just changed my mind.
Do you ever look back and regret that maybe it was the wrong decision? Or?
No, I really don't. I always still thought I wanted to be in that field, but, you know, in those days, women weren't so likely to be doing that. I mean, you raised your family. And that's what Bill Walters-Gershon wanted me to do. So.
Then why did the two of you come back to Kalispell then?
Well, primarily because there was a job. I mean, he could get a job in the firm with, he married the boss's daughter. So that was good or bad. Yeah, I mean, in some ways it was a disadvantage to him because it's always hard to work for your father-in-law. That was difficult, and in some ways, the partners weren't as fair as they might have been just simply because they knew he was, part of the family, and so. But he enjoyed practicing law with Rocco because, again, Rocco was such a good teacher. He felt he learned lots. The only thought he ever had of was getting out of law at one point in time. He always really thought he wanted to sort of be a cowboy. But that didn't happen. Because law is stressful and lots of times not very much fun. It's different now. I mean, law profession is quite different than what it used to be. Just like everything, just like dentistry, like car dealerships. Both Dan and Beth are so glad to be out of. But, things change and you outgrow it or it goes away from your whatever. So I don't know whether he would have continued practicing law or not. But I know he did think it would be awfully nice to go live on a ranch, which wasn't my idea of fun.
Well, a couple of my friends were walking down the street, and they looked up and saw me up there. They knew I was there, but they didn't know I was sitting right there. But I was sitting in the window and studying, and like I say, which was a little unusual, Sunday. And he said, "What are you doing this afternoon?" And I said, "I don't know. I should be studying." He said, "Well, let's do something." I said, "What do you got in mind?" "Well, let's get some gals and go do something, picnic or something." And I said, I suppose we could, something like that. I said, "How about target practice? Go out and do a little target practice." "Sure." I said, "Okay, you get a couple of days. I'll see if I can get one." and we'll go. What I didn't know, this one of these friends of mine had a blind date with Marilyn. I don't even know who I had for a date that day. No offense to the girl, just my memory. Marilyn, are you sure you wouldn't like to go? They're going to go in Dan Korn's Buick convertible. So she said, you know, they're going to have the top down. You can sunbathe. They're going to do a little target practicing and so forth. You'd have a really good time. She says, really? I'm going to go in a convertible? She says, yeah. She says, well, I just changed my mind. Something to that effect. I don't know exactly. So she was there. And so it happened that every time I came, you know, we'd try to help the gals shoot and everything. Every time I come behind her, she was having a real difficult time. So I had to get my arms around her, you know, and steady the pistol. We were shooting pistols most of the time. So steady the pistol a little bit. And she was a pretty nice young lady. I was really impressed. And I hadn't even known her before then. I'd seen her once playing tennis in red shorts. I remember that. The next time I had a real date with her, I took her out dancing. She always claimed that I wanted to find out if she could dance or not, which is probably closer to the truth than what I was willing to admit. So that's how I met Marilyn. I met Marilyn through we called it not only the $1 million asset, but the green dream. So that was the start of the green dream.
Nora was flying for United Airlines as a stewardess. And we met by accident, kind of. I was going back to a dental convention in French Lake Springs, Indiana, and took a flight out of Seattle that had originated in Portland. And my roommate at that time, who was from Hawaii, was telling me how to configure my seating on the airplane so I could sit with the stewardess. And it didn't happen because the plane originated in Portland and you weren't arriving, you know, you didn't necessarily have a seat reservation, but we got on a plane that was half full by the time we got on the plane. So it didn't happen, but it turns out the fellow who was from the University of Oregon, whom I met the next day on a commuter flight and so on out of Chicago, is the fellow that had been sitting with the stewardess. So in conversing with him, he knew her name and that she was flying out of Seattle. She was based in Seattle. And when I got back, it was real easy because I had two classmates at the dental school whose wives worked in reservations for United Airlines. So I just called them that Monday morning, and said, find out the telephone number of Nora Dooley, who's a stewardess based here in Seattle, and by late afternoon, from both sources, I had her phone number. So that's how it happened.
I like Great Falls from a business standpoint. It was really good to me. I really did well over there, and I actually wished later that I'd stayed there longer. But it was an opportunity to get back over here, where I really wanted to be anyway. I would be able to get away from the wind, which I hate. It's the only thing of weather that I don't like. I make a lousy sailor because I don't like wind. And you had to go so far to find trees over there. I have any regrets of being in the car business. It was good to me, good to family. I have regrets in I didn't take vacations. You know, very, very few of them. I think a person should take a couple weeks every month or every year, regardless. Just do it.
I stayed and taught for 3 years at the University of Washington, and I had kind of, during that time, decided that I really liked the university, I really liked teaching, but I was but I didn't really like the politics of the academic situation at that point in time. I could see that in order to get ahead and stay in academics, I really was going to have to go somewhere else, probably, and then come back, or keep going somewhere else. And when I thought about doing that, I really liked the teaching aspect, but I didn't want to have to play the political games. And at that point, Nora and I were married during that period of time in Seattle, and we collectively weren't terribly interested in bringing our children up in the city, because neither of us had grown up in a city. Deciding, that this was a better place to grow up with a lot more freedom and a lot more fun things to do, like riding your bike on the tricycle on the sidewalk up and down the block, and floating little bark boats in the gutters, even in town, when it rained hard, following the boat from block to block, following it going down the gutter. Things like that, burning leaves in the fall after they were collected, and throwing potatoes in the ashes of the leaf pile, and let it cook the potato, and then taking them out later and eating after you got rid of the chard outside, eating the rest of it. That sort of growing up that I enjoyed was not going to be available in the same sense in the city.
I did the things at home that I enjoyed. Like, I did a lot of sewing. And, of course, I learned that from Dissy, otherwise I never would have. But, because she made so many of my clothes. And I had wonderful clothes because of that. And then I kind of did the same thing, sewing for the kids. And, I made shirts for men, relatives, pajamas, all that kind of stuff. Got tired of it. But I think, and I always did enjoy it, home and cooking, everything that was involved with that. That was a way of life then, which isn't quite so much that way anymore. There's so many diversions now that people aren't quite so likely to do that. But we did do that, and going dancing and that sort of thing. And Rocca loved it when Bill performed. He was at lots of the things that Rock and Dissy would have been at, and he was proud of him and liked it. But Bill had done had a partner, a male, a good buddy, a golfer and stuff, that did things with him. That's how they sort of got started, was doing this act together. Well, then Ron moved away, and that meant that Bill didn't have a partner, and he was trying to come up with singles action. And sometimes it would be pretty awful, and I'd say, oh, don't do that. If you will promise me you won't do that, I will do something with you. So then I started doing things with him. And that was the start of our act. And I'll never forget, as long as I live, the first night we did it. And nobody knew that I was going to be part of it. And the look on Rocket's face, he was just beaming.
Mother and Dad had kind of an agreement that he would go to the Catholic church. She didn't have to go to that church. She could go to any one she wanted. And the three of us would not be brought up in the Catholic church. First of all, that didn't seem to throw him either, to start with, that arrangement. And but when he learned the news that he had terminal cancer, it was just about the time when the Catholic Church changed its service, and they went from the Latin service to the English service, and they changed everything else. All of that changed, and I thought to myself, this isn't a good time, because, this is really going to shake somebody who's grown up and been so much a part of that Catholic faith, to go to church and all of a sudden be faced with all of these strange occurrences. I could anticipate that he or anybody else could become very cynical at that point, not go to church, forget about it. But he didn't. He realized early on a fact that most of us don't realize very early, that our faith in God is not tied to some of these practices that any church dictates happen. They're doing it in the best context of trying to run things and organize things, but that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with your faith in God and the practice of that faith.
Years and years and years, and even this long since they've been gone, things I'll do, I'll think, would Dissy and Raka approve of this? Would they think this is the right thing, what I'm doing today? And that's still so ingrained. Now imagine how long it's been since, well, Dissy's been gone for 26 years, and Raka 28 or 29. But that still is in my mind, and has been all the years. And I don't mean it happens as much anymore, because there aren't the reasons for decisions and everything, but that was just something I always thought of. Is this what they would want me to do? Am I doing what they would approve of? So you see how important it was to please them, I guess is what. And it wasn't that they were severe in any way, but you just knew that you wanted to please them because they would do it right and you wanted to do it right. That was kind of that, I guess.
I try not to do anything that would be a real discredit to him. I mean, I didn't use good judgment at times, but that's part of growing up. But I think that we all always enjoyed each other's company. We had fun. You know, there's another experience too that. Did I tell you about the fishing, the last fishing trips?
Yeah.
And Bud can enlarge on these things. I need a good drink of water.
We were headed back that day, and of course it was on his birthdays, the days we were over there. So we were coming back on his birthday, and Dad had a terrible time with his daughters-in-law and his daughter about renewing their driver's license.
Your grandmother, Kay, didn't have a current license. In fact, her license was expired for probably 4 or 5 years. Nora didn't have a license. Hers had been expired for a couple of years. Marilyn didn't have a license. I mean, we all realized this when we started talking. And he says, I don't understand the girls in his family. What do they think they're doing driving without a driver's license?
There wasn't a grace period. You had to do it by your birthday, or you had to go down and take the test over, see. And so when Marilyn or Nora or Kay Munier they'd forget to renew their driver's license, and they didn't want to go down and take the test, so they just wouldn't get a driver's license. They'd be driving around without their driver's license, and that disturbed him no end, and he'd be on them saying, you know, go on, go down there and get your driver's license.
Someday one of them's going to get caught, and then I'll probably have the job of getting them off. Anyway, we were talking, going over the hill, coming down the other side, and I don't know how it came up, whether I or Bud asked. I said, you know, speaking of your birthday, did you get your license renewed? He just stopped dead in his tracks.
There was dead silence in the car. And I'll tell you, he didn't know what to do.
There wasn't a word said. He hadn't got his license. As it turned out, and here it was his birthday. You're supposed to do it for your birthday, you know. Oh, he was just distraught going down the rest of the road.
It was so devastating to him that we laughed among it ourselves, but we didn't dare tease him too much about falling into the same problem, forgetting to renew his driver's license. We really had to feel for him because it just devastated him to think that he'd done that.
When you called me dearie, was down where the bluegrass grows. Your lips were sweeter than julep when you wore a tulip, and I wore a big red rose.
There are so many things that fascinate me about my family history. From the multiple trips at the turn of the last century between Austria and rural Montana, to Rocca's quest for education. From the fact that he and his 3 children all left Kalispell to pursue their education and returned later to raise families, to the Second World War and its effects on the family. But perhaps most of all, I am in increasing admiration and awe of my great-grandmother Dissy, and how she left nearly all she knew, urban life and educated career women, to come to rural Montana and raise a family. This woman seems to me an all too often unsung hero, a position I'm sure is common to women of her generation. It is important to remember, and I think the greatest lesson that I've learned from this project, that in history, most stories are never told. I will forever be grateful for having the chance to tell hers.
I was explaining that Dissy coming so far away from her family, leaving all of her family back there and knowing that she wouldn't see them real often, you know, it was a real, and I think it was a cultural shock to a certain degree too, because of the things that she'd been involved with in the family, you know, and all, and to come to a small town in Montana, knowing no one. There were lots of things about that were, you know, were kind of hard and through those early years, I'm sure, but she told me that all those disappointments and hard times were made up for her by her 3 children. And I just thought that was pretty special.
Right. Have you
question is, based on what we've learned, what is our proper response to that? We're likely going to respond in different ways as we think about those in our past, but hopefully we'll respond in a meaningful way to their energy, their resourcefulness, their character, and perhaps even their sacrifices.